If we don't act
Yeah.
and they're left with that capability, as I said, they're much closer to the ability when they decide to build that nuclear weapon, and then one missile with that warhead, we're talking about a different world.
All right, we are back. He was U.S. ambassador to Israel under President Barack Obama, and subsequently President Joe Biden appointed him as special liaison to Israel on the issue of Iran, and was also an advisor on Middle East issues to the Department of Defense. It's Dan Shapiro. How you doing?
Thanks, Tim. Good to be with you. Happy Juneteenth.
Happy Juneteenth to you as well. I got a DM from you this morning, and I was in the market for somebody to fit this bill, and so it was just fortuitous. And you wrote that you have a different take from your friend Ben Rhodes on the Iran nuclear negotiations and the pros and cons of military action. And as I said earlier this week, I'm deeply torn about the whole thing, and so I was interested to hear your point of view. So why don't you just take it away?
Sure. Thanks. Well, I listened to you and Ben yesterday, and Ben's a friend, and we've worked together for a long time, and we've disagreed on things. And when we disagree, we argue as friends. But I'd want to just come and share a perspective. Yeah, we were both, of course, in the Obama administration when the JCPOA was signed, and I was ambassador to Israel. And you can imagine there was a lot of unhappiness and skepticism in Israel about that agreement. And I was the ambassador called upon to defend it, and I did. And I explained to my Israeli friends, it wasn't a perfect deal. It didn't solve everything, but it did buy time. It did extend out Iran's ability to ever achieve a nuclear weapon, to keep them at least a year distance from that, and keep them there for over a decade. And then when Trump withdrew from the agreement in 2018, I criticized that. I thought that was a mistake. It gave back some of that time. It sort of gave a chance for Iran to shorten the distance sooner, and it has. And that's kind of brought us to this moment. But I do feel like we're sometimes caught in that historical debate, the two tribes, pro and con on JCPOA. And I'm just not sure it's as relevant to the situation we face now. And it's distracting us to some degree from focusing on the outcome that we need. And that was the outcome that the president sort of finally, it took a little time, but landed on in the negotiations he was conducting with Iran, was that there should be no enrichment. There should be no ability for Iran independently to achieve the means
President
to break
Obama.
out. No, I mean President Trump in the negotiations he was conducting, in the last 2-3 months. So that was what he landed on: no enrichment, and of course, the Iranians hadn't agreed to that, and I don't think they were likely to agree to that. We're probably going to face some crisis point in those negotiations, maybe a bit later in the year, and the only chance of them coming around to that position is if you have diplomacy backed by the credible threat of force. But that, I think, is the right position. And I think, three things have changed since those negotiations a decade ago on the JCPOA. And that's one is that just because, and this is partly because of Trump's withdrawal from the agreement, the program has advanced. There's just no two ways about it. Everyone acknowledges. And the International Atomic Energy Agency has confirmed they have about 10 bombs worth of 60% enriched uranium, which they could, in a very short time, days or weeks, turn into weapons-grade uranium. They've shortened the distance. There's some dispute about exactly in what means, but they've clearly done research on weaponization, the separate process of building the bomb. And so the program's advanced, and just the time that it would take them to do that is much less. The second thing is what happened last year. This is when I was serving in the Pentagon. Twice, Iran conducted these overt state-to-state attacks with barrages of missiles and rockets and drones against Israel. In the past, that sort of campaign was conducted through proxies, and it was sort of deniable, what they used to call the shadow war. But now we're talking about this open state-on-state active war, raining really unprecedented numbers of rockets and missiles and drones down on Israel. And you just imagine if any one of those had been tipped with a nuclear warhead, how risky that is. The third thing, I think, is just what changed in the psychology in Israel after October 7th. That is that the mindset has shifted, and this is really across the society. It's not really just about Bibi, that you can't allow threats that could be, to Israel's maybe very existence to mature and come up to the last possible minute before you address them. There were huge failures and errors that led, of course, to their vulnerability on October 7th. They weren't as prepared as they should have been. And so the position they now adopt is that we can't sort of, we've no margin for error. We can't just wait till the last minute to address a threat, especially when we're talking about something with as existential implications as an Iranian nuclear weapon. And of course, they also see an opening because, and I think Ben discussed this yesterday, last October, after the second of those Iranian attacks, the Israelis did go in and they did eliminate the best Iranian air defenses, the S-300s that the Russians had provided. So when they saw that vulnerability and they see the maturing of that threat and they see the risk that is associated with them carrying out a state-on-state act of war, as they've already done twice, just not going to have that margin of error. And so, that brings us to this point when, with the renegotiations, I wish they had given them a bit more time to try to see if they were going to work. I don't really think the Iranians were going to agree to the terms without a threat of force. But that's where we are now. And now Israelis have acted. Trump could have given them a red light, did not. But now we have some decisions facing us.
All right. I want to push on a couple of those different areas. First, on the intelligence about the nuclear program. I think you can probably understand folks who are not as versed in all of this as you, having some boy who cries wolf skepticism, going towards what happened with the Iraq war, intelligence related to that, of course, but also, Iran's been on the brink of a weapon for 20 years now. The director of national intelligence, who I've no love for, was just 3 months ago saying that they weren't that close. And now, just not less than 3 months ago, really. And now just a little bit later, they're saying, oh no, like we have to do this right now. How do you respond to that? Yeah, I think legitimate skepticism that you'd hear from folks on that this is like an imminent threat.
Yeah. Look, I mean, the Iranian strategy for years has been to inch forward with this program, not to rush to a breakout. And so partly their strategy has been to stay within range so that at a time of their choosing, they could break out. And so that means if you're ever warning that they're some distance away, but they're making the decision to proceed slowly, but still give themselves that opportunity, then, a year passes, 2 years pass, 5 years pass, and that hasn't happened. People say, oh, well, see, you were crying wolf. The other thing that's happened, of course, over a number of years has been a range of U.S. and Israeli actions that have put time on the clock. Everything from negotiations to, and the JCPOA is part of that, and sanctions and sabotage and covert actions. So there are various ways that we've been able to extend the timeline that have kept them from, the actual moment of truth. I mean, right. Some of what I say is drawn from information I have access to when I was in government. I, of course, left in January, so I don't know the most recent intelligence. But even then, it was pretty clear that there's research going on that without a formal decision to build a weapon is bringing them closer to the moment, bringing them closer to be able to do that faster if and when they get that decision from the supreme leader. That's on the weaponization side. And then on the enrichment side, there's no dispute. This is all public and documented by the International Atomic Energy Agency. They've accelerated their enrichment of 60% uranium. This was, again, partly a reaction to Trump's withdrawal from the agreement in 2018, but this is where we are. And they now have 10 bombs worth of 60%, which within days, they could produce at least one bomb's worth of 90%. That's weapons grade. And, within a few weeks, multiple bombs worth. So again, to say that there's a decision, no, one can't say they've made that decision, but one can say they've significantly shortened the time that it would take them to do it if they make the decision. And that's where this, do you have the margin of error question comes in.
Okay. So the other thing I think has people worried or concerned is the chatter around this offensive action from Israel, in part because of the success of it, which I've mentioned several times. And it's really kind of astonishing how successful Mossad and Israel IDF has been, both with Hezbollah and this action. But the result of that success has been there's a lot of chatter of like, ooh, like maybe we can get rid of the mullahs altogether, right? Like maybe, and there's been, I think it seems like a notion that this is not just like an effort to bomb the nuclear facilities, but maybe an effort towards regime change altogether. And that gets people leery, given our recent experience. What would you say to that?
Sure. So far, at least, the Israelis have not declared regime change to be the goal of the operation. They've said it's to prevent the nuclear breakout possibility and also the ballistic missiles, which, of course, Iran is using to attack Israel every night. In fact, I think there was a very tough blow against a hospital in southern Israel today from one of those ballistic missiles. They've killed about 24 people, injured hundreds and the like. So that's what Israel says their objective is. I don't think regime change should be the objective of this operation, whether it remains purely Israeli or whether the United States gets involved. And certainly, I'm not talking anything like what happened in Iraq and Afghanistan 20 years ago. We're not putting boots on the ground. We're not marching into Tehran. That's not the case. We should keep the focus and keep on the outcome we need, which is to ensure they don't have that ability to create a nuclear weapon. Now, of course, I'll say, obviously, the regime is a terrible regime, mostly to its own people. It's brutal, it's corrupt, it's mismanaged the economy and the electricity and water, and in every other way, they have squandered the resources of the Iranian people, not on making their lives better and more prosperous, but on pursuing these ideological crusades around the region, mostly against Israel, against us. There's a lot of Iranian, Israeli, Arab, European blood on the hands of this regime. And so no one will shed any tears, or should, when it leaves. But that's a decision for the Iranian people, and they'll have to, make that decision. Now, there may be a tipping point when the regime looks weak. Certain institutions have been rendered less capable or wobbled because of some of this operation. And, again, that might trigger some internal processes, but nobody knows. Nobody knows when those regime fissures will appear, if there's some organized opposition. So that's not really the goal. It shouldn't be the goal.
Yeah, I mean, I have no love for the regime either, but like on the Bibi side of this, I think there's good reason to not maybe believe that like the goal of this operation is just the nuclear regime. I mean, he was on Fox the other day saying that this operation could certainly result in a regime, as the government of Iran is very weak. They shoot women because their hair is uncovered. They shoot students. They suck the oxygen out from these brave and gifted people, the Iranian people. The decision to act, to rise up this time, is the decision of the Iranian people. And I agree with every word of that. But like, coming from the person that is executing a bombing campaign, like, to me, that means that, like, it seems to me that he's saying that he wants to make that happen militarily, or at least is open to that being the end game of this. And I don't know. I think, like, as an aspirational notion, I agree with it, but then we get into kind of a debate if it's really what the real mission is of the campaign.
Yeah, look, I've got no illusions about Bibi. I've worked with him, and we've had our many differences over the years. I think he is speaking aspirationally there. That is, again, an aspiration I share. Sounds like you do too. An awful lot of Iranian people feel that way as well. He's not necessarily the best spokesperson for that. Not somebody who I think is going to be the one to draw Iranians out into the street. So if I were advising him, I'd say, tone it down, chill it out. But I still don't see it as the military objective of the campaign. I still see that focused on the nuclear and the missile threats.
The other thing that I talked about, I'm just interested in your take on, is part of, like, in these discussions, like, I'm just filled with a deep uncertainty, and it makes me nervous that I feel like there are a lot of people that in government and then who are advocates on both sides of this who have, like, utter certainty, right? Like, utter certainty that Iran must be taken out to protect Israel, or utter certainty that Israel must not do anything, because it will lead to catastrophe. And I think that is blinding, right? Like, when you have that, I was talking about this with McKinnon in the first segment. There's Iraq looked really great for 6 weeks, and that led to a hubris, I think, about what was achievable. And I worry about that here. I worry about the fact that it's the one issue where my inbox is most filled with people who are 100% damn certain on one way or the other that we should do this. And like, that worries me when you have Bibi and Trump and folks who could be a little reckless, right? That things can spiral out of control. Does that not? I mean, because who the hell knows, right? I don't know. Like, actions like this might yield freedom for the Iranian people. It might yield a backlash that's hard to predict. What do you say to that?
So first of all, I'd say you're right that nobody who projects certainty about how any of this is going to unfold should be believed that they know. And that's part of this kind of frustration I have with the sort of tribal debate about the pros and cons of the JCPOA. I just think we should focus really carefully on what the objectives should be from here. And you're right, the uncertainty goes both ways, right? If we don't act and they're left with that capability, as I said, they're much closer to the ability when they decide to build that nuclear weapon, and then one missile with that warhead, we're talking about a different world. If we do act, yes, there's always risk when you take military action. And so this has to be done thoughtfully and carefully. And yes, Donald Trump is not the commander in chief I would have chosen for judiciousness and care and wisdom in how he approaches this. And I can't stand the kind of reckless tweets and sort of thinking out loud, and all of his impulses.
You don't
about,
think that the threats to assassinate the Ayatollah,
evacuate
via
Tehran,
social media,
assassinate the Ayatollah, all of those, unconditional surrender in all caps, right? This is not helpful. So, I'm hoping, of course, that judicious decisions are ultimately made. I know the military who are advising him, the CENTCOM commander, General Eric Kurilla, and the team, and they're very, very smart and careful and thoughtful, and they mitigate risk. So I just think we should be thoughtful about it. And actually, there's still an opening for diplomacy here, and it should be coercive diplomacy, right? It's clear the president is considering this strike. He's putting in place the forces that would be necessary. He's moved a second carrier into the region, and tankers and fighters, and then the bombers that would come in at the end would actually execute it. But then you have the rest necessary for defense on any blowback. And there's risk, and you have to message carefully to the Iranians that if they were to respond, especially against U.S. forces, they would pay a very dear price for that, and try to use that as deterrence. There's risk of escalation. There's also the ability sometimes to use that risk of escalation to actually find a de-escalatory path. But that's what's all on the table now, and that's an opening actually for the Iranians to come to the table. In fact, the foreign minister of Iran is meeting with the European foreign ministers, the British and French and German, tomorrow in Geneva. That may be an opening for him to give the concession they wouldn't give in the talks before, which is, all right, we're going to give up this enrichment program. And that would spare everybody having to go through this. That would be the best outcome. But if they don't, then there's the question of who can actually deal with this militarily. The Israelis, by the way, may have solutions to Fordo, the underground facility, that we don't fully know about. They've shown a lot of ingenuity and creativity with pagers against Hezbollah and commandos and smuggling drones in, right? We know what they're capable of, so they may have surprises up their sleeve. But if it requires a U.S. action with our unique capabilities to get that underground site, to make sure that they don't have that enrichment capability, it has to be on the table. And so the president's given himself that option. I just don't think he's made the decision yet.
All right. Anything I didn't ask you wanted to mention?
Listen, this is tough, and nobody, as you said, should feel that this is a good situation or confident about outcomes. But I do want to get the outcome right. The outcome is Iran with no ability to have a nuclear weapon. So that's the moment we're in.
All right, Ambassador Dan Shapiro, man, thank you so much for reaching out and for listening to the show. And let's stay in touch as this stuff develops. All right.
Thanks, Tim. Love to. Take care.
All right, everybody else, we'll see you back tomorrow. We got a good one coming, so make sure to tune in. Peace.